Strife is a three-act play by English writer John Goldsworthy. It was his third play and the most successful of the three. It was produced in 1909 in London at the Duke of York Theatre and in New York at the New Theatre. In the play, there is a prolonged, unofficial strike at a factory. At the trade union and the company directors attempt to resolve the affair, which is causing hardship among the workers' families. There is a confrontation between the company chairman and the leader of the strike. So, content, history, synopsis, Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3. Okay, so Act 2 में दो scene है, scene 1 and scene 2, and then Act 3. Television revival, reference, and all these. Now, the Strike was Goldsworthy's third play after The Silver Box 1906 which was successful and Joy 1907 which failed. He wrote it in a few months in 1907 and sent the manuscript to friends for comment, including Edward Garnett and Joseph Conrad. After being refused by several theatre managers, a successful production in Manchester led to its production in London by Charles Frohman at the Duke of York's Theatre, opening on March 1909 for the first of six matinee performances. It was well received and the play was transferred to the Haymarket Theatre, then to the Adolphi Theatre for evening performance. It attracted much attention. A reviewer in the Times wrote, when an artist of Mr. Goldsworthy's high endeavor, mental equipment, and technical skill writes a play with strife, like a strife, he has done much more than write a play. He has rendered a public service. Synopsis: the action takes place on 7th February 8, the Trinartha tin plate work on the border of England and Wales. For several months, there has been a strike at the factory. Act 1. The directors concerned about the damage to the company hold a board meeting at the home of the manager of the works, Simon Harness, presenting the trade union that has withdrawn support for the strike, tells them he will make the men withdraw their excessive demands and directors should agree to the union's demand. David Roberts, leader of the men's committee, tells them he wants to the strikes to continue until their demands are met. Although the men are starving, it is a confrontation between the elderly company chairman, John Anthony, and Roberts, and neither gives way. After the meeting, Annie Underwood, daughter of John Anthony, and wife of the manager, talks to her father. She is aware of the suffering of the families. Roberts' wife, Annie, used to be her maid. She is also worried about the strain of the affair on her father. Henry Tench, company secretary, tells Anthony he may be outvoted by the board. Act 2. Enid visits the Roberts cottage and talks to Annie Roberts, who has a heart condition. When David Robert comes in, Annie tells him there must be a compromise and that he should have more pity on his wife. He does not change his position and he is unmoved by his wife's concern for the family of the strikers. Enid leaves disappointed. Act 2, Scene 2. In an open space near the factory, the platform has been improvised and harnessed in a speech to the strikers says they have been ill advised and they should cut their demands instead of starving. They should report the union who will support them. There are short speeches from two men who have contrasting opinions. Roberts goes to the platform and, in a long speech, says that the fight is against capital, a white faced, stony hearted monster. He have got it on its knees here and you too give up at the last minute to save your miserable body's pain. When news is brought that his wife is dead, Robert leaves and the meeting peters out. Act 3. In the home of the manager, Annie talks to Edgar Anthony. He is the chairman's son and one of the directors. She is less sympathetic now towards the men and concerned about their father, says Edgar should support him. However, Edgar's sympathies are with the men. They receive the news that Mr. Roberts has died. Directors meeting already bad-tempered is affected by the news. Edgar says he would rather resign than go on starving women. The other directors react badly to an opinion put so frankly. John Anthony makes a long speech insisting they should not give in to the men. He says there is only one way of treating men, with the iron hand. This half and half business has brought all this upon us. Yield one demand and they will make it six. He puts to the board the mention that the dispute should be placed in the hands of Harness. All the directors are in favor. Anthony alone is not in favor and he resigns. The man's committee, including Roberts and Harness, come in to receive the result. Robert repeats his resistance, but on being told the outcome, realizes that he and Anthony have both been thrown over. The agreement is what had been proposed before the strike back began. Goldsworthy's escape. Goldsworthy's escape is 1926 is based on that familiar 20th theme. The gentleman come down in the world. In fact, you can't go much further down than Captain Matt Dennett, gallantly protecting a needy prostitute from an over assiduous plainclothes policeman. This ex-officer hit the detective, who fell back, hit his head on railings, and died. So Matt is sent to Dartmoor on a manslaughter rap and one foggy evening escapes from a working party. So the play is a series of episodes in each of which the escaped convict meets people who will either help or hinder his escape. They divide on class lines. A cultivated lady responds to the fact that he is a gentleman and helps him. A retired judge does much the same. A vulgar lower middle class family tries to hinder him, but he manages to steal their care. A man of his wife of rather an indeterminate class are divided. She shows her greater sophistication by responding to the ex-officer's plight, while her husband is more negative. A tenant farmer and his laborers are against him, but easily fooled. But easily fooled, a little girl responding instinctively helps him. A pair of spinsters are divided. Miss Dora, who goes hunting and is a free thinker, responds to his plight. Miss Grace, older, a churchgoer and a conformist, doesn't want to help him, but is finally influenced by Dora to tell a lie to help him go free. Finally, he arrives in the vestry of a church. The vicar had been an army chaplain and is torn between conflicting sympathies. He hides the prisoner and misleads the pursuer, but when the police ask directly whether or not he has seen the convict, he is faced with the prospect of telling a direct lie. He is saved from the dilemma by decent Captain Dinant stepping from his hiding place and giving him up. He can't bear to morally compromise the vicar, and if you will believe that about a convict on the run, you'll believe anything. I imagine that the play would be exciting on stage, but unlike the other Goldsworthy's plays I have read or seen lately, it is really absolutely tosh. What could have been an interesting examination of charity towards the unfortunate becomes an indulgence in the mystique of class, which was such a potent 20s myth. A gentleman remains a gentleman even when he is gone down in the world, and other gentlemen or ladies respond with instinctive feeling towards him. The lower middles are envious and blind to his qualities. The working class are stupid. Goldsworthy, who in other pieces had played interestingly with class stereotypes, here dishes out just what a waste end audience wanted to hear, that people like them are morally superior to the unthinking high polio polloi. The play's faith in the instinctive sympathy of the upper classes for the underdog seems a best wishful thinking. I can't help suspecting it's the reverse of the truth. The picture of the ex-officer is interesting, though. He gets into the trouble because he is gallantly gone to the insistence of a street girl. Is it too fanciful to stop a parallel with Britain getting into the war to help helpless Belgium? When on the run, he uses skills and capacities for endurance that he has learned in France, so the ex soldier is imagined as a challenge to the stable world of law and order. Hamlet, Act 1. Prince Hamlet of Denmark is the son of recently deceased King Hamlet and nephews of King Claudius, his father's brother and successor. Claudius hastily married King Hamlet's widow Gertrude, Hamlet's mother, and took the throne for himself. Denmark has a long standing feud with neighboring Norway, in which King Hamlet slew King Fortinbras and Norway in a battle some year ago. Although Denmark defeated Norway and the Norwegian throne fell to King Fortinbras's infirm brother, Denmark fears that an invasion led by the dead Norwegian king's son, Prince Fortinbras, is imminent. On a cold night on the ramparts of Elsinore, the Danish Roval castle, the sentries Bernardo and Marcellus discuss on ghosts resembling the late King Hamlet, which they have recently seen, and bring Prince Hamlet's friend Horatio as a witness. After the ghost appears again, the three vow to tell Prince Hamlet what they have witnessed. The court gathers the next day. The King Claudius and Queen Gertrude discuss affair of state with their elderly advisor Polonius, Claudius grants permission for Polonius's son Leatrius to return to school in France, and he sends envoys to inform the king of Norway about Fortinbras. Claudius also questions Hamlet regarding his continuing to grieve for his father and forbids him to return to his school in Wittenberg. After the court exists, Hamlet despairs of his father's death and his mother's hastily remarriage. Learning of the ghost from Horatio, Hamlet resolves to see it himself. Saying alas, poor Yorick, as he contemplates mortality, Ophelia's funeral procession approaches, led by Leatrice. Hamlet and Horatio initially hide, but when Hamlet realizes that Ophelia is the one being buried, he reveals himself, proclaiming his love for her. Leatrice and Hamlet fight by Ophelia's graveside, but the brawl is broken up. Back to Elsinore, Hamlet explains to Horatio that he had discovered Claudius's letter for Rosencrantz and Guildenstern belonging and replaced it with a forged copy indicating that his former friend should be killed instead. A foppish courtier or cynic interrupts the conversation to deliver the fencing challenge to Hamlet. Hamlet, despite Horatio's ideas, accepts it. Hamlet does well at first, leading the match by two hits to none, and Gertrude raises to toast to him using the poisoned glass of wine Claudius had set aside for Hamlet. Claudius tries to stop her but is too late. She drinks, and Leatrice realizes the plot will be revealed. Leatrice slashes Hamlet with his poisoned blade. In the ensuing scuffle, they switch weapons, and Hamlet wounds Leatrice with his own poisoned sword. Gertrude collapses and, claiming she has been poisoned, dies. In his dying moment, Beatrice reconciles with Hamlet and reveals Claudius's plan. Hamlet rushes at Claudius and kills him as the poison takes effect. Hamlet, hearing that Fortinbras is marching through the area, names the Norwegian prince as his successor. Horatio, distraught at the thought of being the last survivor and living whilst Hamlet does not, says he will commit suicide by drinking the dregs of Gertrude's poisoned wine. But Hamlet begs him to live on and tells his story. Hamlet dies in Horatio's arm, proclaiming the rest is silence. Fortinbras, who was ostensibly marching towards Poland with his army, arrives at the place along with the English ambassador, bringing news of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Guildenstern's death. Horatio promises to recount the full story of what happened, and as Polonius' son Leatrius prepares to depart for France, Polonius offers him advice that culminates in the maxim, "To thine own self be true." Polonius' daughter Ophelia admits her interest in Hamlet, but Leatrius warns her against seeking the prince's attention, and Polonius orders her to reject his advance. That night on the rampart, the ghost appears to Hamlet, tells the prince that he was murdered by Claudius, and demands that Hamlet avenge the murder. Hamlet agrees, and the ghost vanishes. The prince confides to Horatio and the sentries that from now on he plans to put an antique disposition on or act as though he has gone mad. Hamlet forces them to swear to keep his plan for remain secret. However, he remains uncertain of the ghost's reliability. Act 2. Ophelia rushes to her father, telling him that Hamlet arrives at her door the prior night, half undressed and behaving erratically. Polonius blames love for Hamlet's madness and resolves to confront Claudius and Gertrude. As he enters to do so, the king and queen are welcoming Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, two students acquaintance of Hamlet, to Elsinore. The royal couple has requested that the two students investigate the cause of Hamlet's mood and behavior. Additional news requires that Polonius wait to be heard. Messengers from Norway inform Claudius that the king of Norway has rebuked Prince Fortinbras for attempting to refight his father's battle. The forces that Fortinbras had. Hamlet jokes that with Claudius about what he has hidden Polonius' body, and the king fearing for his life, sends Rosencrantz and Guildenstern to accompany Hamlet to England with a sealed letter to the English king requesting that Hamlet be executed immediately. Unhinged by grief that Polonius' death, Ophelia wanders Elsinore. Leatrice arrives back from France, enraged by his father's death and his sister's madness. Claudius convinces Leatrice that Hamlet is solely responsible, but a letter soon arrives indicating that Hamlet has returned to Denmark foiling Claudius's plan. Claudius switches tactics, posing a fencing match between Leatrice and Hamlet to settle their differences. Leatrice will give it a poison tipped foil, and if that fails, Claudius will offer Hamlet poisoned wine as a congratulation. Gertrude interrupts to report that Ophelia has drawn, though it is unclear whether was suicide or an accident caused by her madness. Act 5. Horatio has received a letter from Hamlet explaining that the prince escaped by negotiating with pirates who attempted to attack his England-bound ship, and the friends reunite off stage. Two gravediggers discuss Ophelia's apparent suicide while digging her grave. Hamlet arrives with Horatio and banters with one of the gravedigger who unearths the skull of a jester for Hamlet's childhood. Yorick Hamlet picks up the skull, conscripted to march against Denmark will instead be sent against Poland, though they will pass through Danish territory to get theirs. Polonius tells Claudius and Gertrude his theory regarding Hamlet's behavior and then speaks to Hamlet in a hall of the castle to try to learn more. Hamlet finds madness and subtly insults Polonius all the while. When Rosencrantz and Guildenstern arrive, Hamlet greets his friend warmly but quickly discerns that they are there to spy on him for Claudius. Hamlet admits that he is upset at the situation but refuses to give the true reason, instead remarking, "What a piece of work is a man." Rosencrantz and Guildenstern tell Hamlet that they have brought along a troupe of actors that they met while traveling to Elsinore. Hamlet, after welcoming the actors and dismisses his friend turned spices, asks them to deliver a soliloquy about the death of King Priam and Queen Hecuba. At the climax of the Trojan War, Hamlet then asks the actors to stage the murder of the Gonzago, a play featuring a death in the style his father's murder. Hamlet instead to study Claudius's reaction to the play and thereby determining the truth of the ghost story Claudius guides. Then Act 3, Polonius forces Ophelia to return Hamlet's love letter to the prince, while he and Claudius secretly watch in order to evaluate Hamlet's reaction. Hamlet is walking alone in the hall as the king and Polonius wait Ophelia's entrance. Then Hamlet muses on thought of life versus death, and Ophelia enters and tries to return Hamlet's thing. Hamlet accuses her of immodesty and cries, "Get thee to a nunnery." Though it is unclear whether this too is a show of madness or genuine distress, his reaction convinces Claudius that Hamlet is not mad for love. Shortly thereafter, the court resembles to watch the play Hamlet has. So commission. After seeing the player king murdered by his rival pouring poison in his ear, Claudius abruptly rises and runs from the room for him. This is proof of his uncle's guilt. Gertrude summons Hamlet to her chamber to demand an explanation. Meanwhile, Claudius talks to himself about the impossibility of repenting. Since he still has possession of his ill-gotten goods, his brother's crown and wife, he sinks to his knees. Hamlet, on his way to visit his mother, sneaks up behind him but does not kill him, reasoning that killing Claudius while he is praying will send him straight to heaven, while his father's ghost is stuck to purgatory in the queen's bedchamber. Hamlet and Gertrude fight bitterly. Polonius, spying on the conversation from behind a tapestry, calls for help as Gertrude believes Hamlet wants to kill her, calls out for help herself. Sorry. Just because of the too much cold, Hamlet, believing it is Claudius, stabs wildly King Polonius. He pulls aside a curtain and sees his mistake. In a rage, Hamlet abruptly insults his mother for her apparent ignorance. Claudius is villainy, but the ghost enters and reprimands for his inaction and harsh word. Unable to see or hear the ghost herself, Gertrude takes Hamlet's conversation with it as further evidence of madness. After begging the queen to stop sleeping with Claudius, Hamlet leaves, dragging Polonius' corpse away. Act 4. Plot Act 1. Amid thunder and lightning, the three witches decide that their next meeting will be with Macbeth. In the following scene, a wounded sergeant reports to King Duncan of Scotland that his generals Banquo and Macbeth, the Thane of Glamis, have just defeated the elite forces of Norway and Ireland, who were led by the traitorous MacDowald and the Thane of Cawdor. Macbeth, the kingsman, is praised for his bravery and fighting prowess. In the following scene, Macbeth and Banquo discuss the weather and their victory. As they wander onto a heath, the three witches enter and greet them with prophecies. Though Banquo challenges them First, they address Macbeth, hailing him as Thane of Glamis, Thane of Cawdor, and that he will be king hereafter. Macbeth appears to be stunned to silence when Banquo asks of his own fortunes. The witches respond paradoxically, saying that he will be less than Macbeth, yet happier and less successful, yet more he will father a line of kings, though he himself will not be one. While the two men wonder at these pronouncements, the witches vanish, and another thing, Rose arrive and informs Macbeth of his newly bestowed title, Thane of Cawdor. The first prophecy is thus fulfilled, and Macbeth, previously skeptical, immediately begins to harbor ambitions of becoming king. Macbeth, disturbed, visits the three witches once more and asks them to reveal the truth of their prophecies to him. To answer his question, they summon horribly apparitions, each of which offers prediction and further prophecies to put Macbeth's fear at rest. First, they conjure an armed head, which tells him to beware of Macduff. Second, a bloody child tells him that no one born of a woman will be able to harm him. Third, a crowned child holding a tree states that Macbeth will be safe until Great Birnam Wood comes to Dunsinane Hill. Macbeth is relieved and feels secure because he knows that all men are born of women and forest cannot possibly move. Macbeth also asks whether Banquo's son will ever reign in Scotland, to which the witches conjure a procession of eight crowned kings, all similar in appearance to Banquo, and the last carrying a mirror that reflects even more kings. Macbeth realizes that these are all Banquo's descendants, having acquired kinship in numerous countries. After the witches perform a mad dance and leave, Lennox enters and tells Macbeth that Macduff has fled to England. Macduff orders Macduff's castle be seized, and Macbeth orders Macduff's castle be seized, and most cruelly sends murderers to slaughter Macduff, as well as Macduff's wife and King Duncan. Welcome and praise Macbeth and Banquo, and Duncan declares that he will spend the night at Macbeth's castle at Inverness. Duncan also names his son Malcolm as his heir. Macbeth sends a message ahead to his wife, Lady Macbeth, telling her about the witch's prophecies. Lady Macbeth suffers none of her husband's uncertainty, and wishes him to murder Duncan in order to obtain kingship. When Macbeth arrives at Inverness, she overrides all of her husband's objection by challenging his manhood and successfully persuades him to kill the king that very night. He and Lady Macbeth plan to get Duncan's two-chamber land drunk so that Macbeth planned to get Duncan to Chamberlain drunk so that they will back out. The next morning, they will frame the Chamberlains for the murder. Since the Chamberlains would remember nothing whatsoever, they would be blamed for the deed. Act 2. While Duncan is asleep, Macbeth stabs him despite his doubt, and a number of supernatural portents, including a hallucination of a bloody dagger. He is so shaken that Lady Macbeth has to take charge. In accordance with her plan, she frames Duncan's sleeping servants for the murder by placing daggers on them. Early the next morning, Lennox, a Scottish nobleman, and Macduff, the loyal Thane of Fife, arrive. A porter opens the gate and Macbeth leads them to the king's chamber, where Macduff discovers Duncan's body. Macbeth murders the guard to prevent them from professing their innocence, but claims he did so in a fit of anger over their misdeeds. Duncan's son Malcolm and Donald Bane flee to England and Ireland respectively, fearing that whoever killed Duncan desired this demise as well. The rightful heir's flight makes them suspect, and Macbeth assumes that throne as the new king of Scotland as a kingsman of the dead king. Banquo reveals this to the audience, and while skeptical of the children, although Macduff is no longer in castle, everyone in Macduff's castle is put to death, including Lady Macbeth and their young son. Act 5. Lady Macbeth becomes racked with guilt from the crimes she and her husband have committed at night in the king's palace. Dunsinane, a doctor and a gentlewoman, discuss Lady Macbeth's strange habit of sleepwalking. Suddenly, Lady Macbeth enters in the trance with a candle in her hand. Bemoaning the murder of Duncan, Lady Macduff and Banquo, she tries wash off imaginary blood stain from her hand, all the while speaking of the terrible thing she knows she pressed her husband to do, she leaves, and the doctor and gentlewoman marvel at her descent into madness. In England, Macduff is informed by Rose that his castle is surprised, wife and babies savagely slaughtered. When this news of his family's execution reaches him, Macduff is stricken with grief and vows revenge. Prince Malcolm, the eldest son, has succeeded in raising an army in England, and Macduff joins him as he rides to Scotland to challenge Macbeth's force. The invasion has the support of the Scottish noble, who are appalled and frightened by Macbeth tyrannical and murderous behavior. Malcolm leads an army along with Macduff and Englishman Seward, the Earl of Northumberland, against Dunsinane Castle. While encamped in Birnam Wood, the soldiers are ordered to cut down and carry tree branches to camouflage their number. New King Macbeth, he remembers the witch's prophecy about how his own descendants would inherit the throne, and this makes him suspicious of Macbeth. Act 3. Despite his success, Macbeth, also aware of this part of the prophecy, remains uneasy. Macbeth invites Banquo to a royal banquet where he discovers that Banquo and his young son Fleance will be riding out that night. Fearing Banquo's suspicions, Macbeth arranges to have him murdered by hiring two men to kill them, late sending the third murderer presumably to ensure that the deed is completed. The assassin succeeds in killing Banco, but if Fleance escapes, Macbeth becomes furious. He fears that his power remains insecure as long as an heir of Banco remains alive. At the banquet, Macbeth invites his lord and Lady Macbeth to a night of dancing and merriment. Banco's ghost enters and sits in Macbeth's place. Macbeth raves fearfully, startling his gaze at the ghost is visible only to him. The other panic at the sight of Macbeth raging at an empty chair until desperate Lady Macbeth tells them that her husband is merely afflicted with a familiar and harmless malady. The ghost departs and returns once more, causing the same riotous anger and fear Macbeth. This time Lady Macbeth tells the visitor to leave and they do so. At the end, Hecate scolds the three weird sister for helping Macbeth, especially without consulting her. In Hecate instructs the witches to give Macbeth false security. Note that some scholars believe the Hecate scene was added in later. Before Macbeth's opponent arrive, he receives news that Lady Macbeth has killed herself, causing him to sink into a deep and pessimistic despair and deliver his tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow soliloquy. Though he reflects on the brevity and meaninglessness of life, he nevertheless awaits the English and fortifies Dunsinane. He is certain that the witch's prophecies guarantee his invincibility, but is struck with fear when he learns that the English army is advancing on Dunsinane, shielded with bow cut from Birnam in apparent fulfillment of one of the prophecies. A battle culminates in Macduff's confrontation with Macbeth, who kills young Seward in combat. The English forces overwhelm his army and castle. Macbeth boasts that he has no reason to fear Macduff, for he cannot killed by any man born of woman. Macduff declares that he was from an mother's womb. He is from his mother's womb, untimely ripped, born by caesarean section, and not a natural birth, and is not of woman born. Fulfilling the second prophecy, Macbeth realizes too late that he has misinterpreted the witch's birth. Though he realizes that he is doomed, and despite Macduff urging him to yield, he is unwilling to surrender and continues fighting. Macduff kills and beheads him, thus fulfilling the remaining prophecy. Macduff carries Macbeth's head out on stage, and Malcolm discusses how order has been restored. His last reference to Lady Macbeth, however, reveals its thought by self and violent hand took of her life, but the method of her suicide is undisclosed. Malcolm, now the King of Scotland, declares his benevolent intentions for the country and invites all to see him crowned at Scone. King Lear. Lear retires from the throne and decides to divide the king among his three daughters. However, first he put them through a test by asking each of them to declare how much they love him. Eventually, he only subdivides his kingdom between two of his eldest daughters. The reason is that they show a relevant loyalty and love towards their father, though superficially flattery. However, the last-born daughter despises the phoniness of her sister and refuses to pander to her father. In response, her father disowns and banishes her. She eventually marries the French king, who later leads his army against her two sisters. Soon afterward, King Lear discovers that his elder daughter's words were mere flattery done to attain power. Upon attaining wealth and land, he soon becomes a nuisance to his daughters, who humiliate and discard him. Struck by this belief that his beloved daughter do not truly love him, Leo starts losing his sanity. He escapes from his daughter's house and loiters upon a heath in the course of a great thunderstorm in the company of his fool as well as kid, a secret nobleman who is loyal to him. In an alternate story, the Earl of Gloucester is also manipulated by Edmund, his illegitimate son, into believing that Edgar, his true son, is plotting to overthrow him. In both cases, the power ruler are humbled by the realization that they were well, at the end of the play, both Earl of Gloucester and King Lear have learned through personal experience who is loyal to them. Through act of poetic justice, Regan and Goneril are blindsided by Edmund. Goneril, after that, kills Regan, then proceeds to commit suicide. Edgar then kills Edmund. Finally, Cordelia gets killed through hanging after Edgar shoots a decree, and King Lear eventually dies from his heartbreak. Nevertheless, peace and order are fully restored within the king. King Othello. Okay, so William Shakespeare of 16th century Venice, and who is a noble blank army, war army. So I think married woman called Desdemona. Okay, of a century, women called Desdemona marries. Okay, uh, Desdemona, daughter of a prominent Brabantio, when he even is completely furious. He loves Desdemona. Lago has a secret jealousy and resentment towards Othello because Lieutenant Cassio has been put in front of him and also suspects to cheating his with his wife. Waiting on revenge, Lago plans to devious curse suspicions in Othello's mind with Desdemona and has been Desdemona has been having and decided to start a street fight, which Cassio is blamed for and is the his then his post by through his post by Othello. Desdemona takes up Cassio's case with her uh, while so William Shakespeare's Othello takes place in 16th century Venice and also Cyprus. Othello, who is the noble black warrior of army that secretly marries a beautiful white woman called Desdemona, who is the daughter of a prominent senator named Brabantio. When he eventually finds out that is completely furious, he decides to disown Desdemona. Lago has a secret jealousy and resentment towards Othello because a soldier named Lieutenant Cassio has been put in front of him and also suspects that Othello has been cheating with his wife. Waiting on revenge, Lago plans a devious comeback to plant suspicions in Othello's mind that Desdemona has been having an affair with Cassio. He decides to start a street fight with Cassio is blamed for, and is then dismissed from his post by Othello. Desdemona takes up Cassio's case with her husband, which only increases his suspicion that the pair has are lovers. Pairs are lovers. Then, while all of this is happening, Lago manages to find a treasured handkerchief from Desdemona that was given to her by Othello. He somehow gets the handkerchief on Cassio so that Othello sees it and is fine. He finally includes that the possession is proof of the affair. Due to the jealousy, he orders Lago to murder Cassio. Then Othello decides to strangle Desdemona. Immediately afterwards, her innocence is revealed and Lago's treachery exposed. In a fit of grief and remorse, Othello kills himself and Lago is into custody by the authorities. Murder in the Cathedral is divided into two parts with an interlude separating them. The play begins with the thought of the chorus, a group of common women of Canterbury. They say that Archbishop Thomas Becket has been all away from his Canterbury congregation, of which they remember for 7 years. Becket has been away because of religious and political conflict he came to have with King Henry too. While they miss his presence, the chorus does not wish for Becket to come back as they fear his return would stir up old conflicts which might get him killed. Three priests who served the archbishop in the past they enter the scene as well as a herald who informs them that the chorus that Becket is in England back from France. The chorus is dismayed, worried that Becket's return will lead to his death and therefore their own religious turmoil. They will lose their spiritual leaders. The priest, on the other hand, readily welcome Becket back to Canterbury. Becket enters the scene and is shortly accosted by four tempters, four people who one by one try to persuade or tempt Becket into adopting certain views on how he should balance his religious power as archbishop with its associated political power, which could either supplement his religious authority or replace it altogether. Becket discounts all the tempers' proposals, thinking that none of their reasons for his future are sourced in the higher spiritual dimensions of fate or for God's plan. He decides that martyrdom, sacrificing his life in devotion to God, is his fate, and refuses to be tempted by other, more earthly pursuits of political power or worldly secular desires. Further, in the interlude, Becket gives a sermon to the congregation of Canterbury Cathedral. He asks his audience to think about sainthood from a divine perspective and consider to conventional human understanding of inti. One second. Okay, this is a saintliness as pure, peaceful, and gained without fortress hardship, adding that Jesus' disciples became saint only after experiencing great suffering. He ends the sermons by saying that it may be the last time he stands before the congregation, foreshadowing his martyrdom. In the second part of the play, four knights serving Henry II arrive at Canterbury Cathedral and accost Becket, calling him a traitor to the crown. Before Becket left, the king uh, appoints him to be the Chancellor of England as well as Archbishop. After initially accepting both position, however, Becket immediately dropped the chancellorship. Further, the knights say Becket then began to abandon all the king's policies which he had formerly supported, claiming they have been sent by the king. The knights asked Becket if he'll agree to appear before Henry II and speak for his action. Becket responds by saying that if the king has ordered such an appearance, then the public ought to be allowed to know Henry's charges against him and personally witness his defense against them. The knights disregard his response and move to attack Becket, but they resist and some attendant enter the scene before they get a chance to. The knights leave, promising to return for Becket, knowing that the knights will be returning to murder the archbishop. The priest try to persuade him to go into hiding, but Becket refuses, fully committed to his martyrdom. When the knights come back to the cathedral, the priest bar its front door, preventing them from entering. Becket, however, demands that the priest open the door, thereby offering his life up to the swords of of the knights and to his own martyrdom, saying it's against the church policy to exclude anyone from entering one of its cathedral. The priest unbar the doors, and the knights enter and kill Becket. Devastated by Becket's death, the chorus cries out in pain, desperation that the sky and air be cleansed of the death newly sprung upon Canterbury. The priest, however, concludes that Becket's death was manifestation of fate and that the church is stronger for it. The four knights then turn towards the audience and offer argument to defense of the decision to murder Becket. They describe why they think he was a traitor to the king and also largely responsible for his own fate. The play ends with the chorus asking God forgive them and have mercy on them for not seeing at first Becket's martyrdom as having incredible spiritual significance beyond their own personal concerns. Following the priest, the chorus involves to see Becket's death as something caused by a divine source which they cannot understand but which nonetheless merit their faith and devotion. Summary. Summary of what? That is summary of Waiting for Godot. Is a play in two act. Act 1 begins on a country road by a tree. It is evening. Estragon, an old man, is sitting on a low mount trying to remove his boot. Vladimir, another old man, joins him. They begin to chat. They have apparently known each other for years. Once perhaps respectable, the other now homeless, debilitated and often suicidal. They wonder out loud why क्यों इतना जोर से बंद कर रहा है बच्चा loud why they did not kill themselves years ago. They consider the possibility of doing it today. They are waiting for someone. So they have apparently known each other for years. One perhaps respectable, they are now homeless, debilitated, and often suicidal. They wonder out loud why they did not kill themselves years ago. They consider the possibility of doing it today. They are waiting for someone they call Godot. While they wait, they share conversation, food, and memories. Two other Two other elderly men, Pozo and Lucky, arrive on the scene. It is clear that Pozo is a master and Lucky is the slave upon command. Command the slave dances and thinks out loud for the entertainment of the other until he is forcibly silenced. After Lucky and Pozo depart, a boy arrives. He tells Estragon and Vladimir that Guru will not be there today but will be there tomorrow. He leaves and they continue to wait. The second act is almost the same as the first act. The tree has sprouted leaves. Estragon and Vladimir chat while they wait for Godo, and Pozo and Lucky arrive again. This time Pozo is blind and helpless and Lucky is mute. After some interpretation interaction, Pozo and Lucky leave and the boy arrives. He has the same message as before. Godot will be there tomorrow. Stragon and Vladimir are left to wait as before. The life and work of Samuel Beckett. Look Back in anger follows a young husband and wife. This is another story that is the Look Back in Anger. It's a drama, okay? So Look Back in Anger follows a young husband and wife, Ellison and Jimmy Porter, as they attempt to navigate class conflict the and deal with a deterioration marriage in 1950s England. Ellison comes from the traditional upper class background. Jimmy comes from a working class background. Though he is highly educated, the couple lives with Cliff Lewis, an affordable working class man, and Jimmy's longtime friend. The scene opens at a Sunday morning in the apartment. Ellison irons clothes while Cliff and Jimmy read the newspaper. The play's first act largely consists of Jimmy's angry tirades against upper class complacency and his wife's lack of enthusiasm. Jimmy thinks that suffering is the only way to experience true human emotion and that Ellison and other upper class people are therefore less alive than he is. He also seems to have some nostalgia for a past age in Britain when the country had more power. Jimmy's attempt to shock his wife into some display of emotion escalate as the act progresses. He insults her family and complains that all women are out to destroy men. Cliff attempts to cheer Jimmy up, begins to banter and rough house with his friend. The two fall against Allison's ironing board and she burns her arm. Jimmy apologizes, but she yells at him to leave and he exists. Cliff helps Leeson treat the burn, and she reveals to him that she is pregnant with Jimmy's child. She hasn't told Jimmy yet because she is afraid that he will feel trapped and angry. Cliff comforts Leeson and tells her that Jimmy loves her. Jimmy enters while they are, but doesn't acknowledge or object. Soon after, Cliff leaves to get some cigarettes, and Leeson and Jimmy share a tender moment. They play their bear and squirrel game, which all allows them to escape into a fiction while pretending to be animals. Then Cliff returns and says that Helena Charles, one of Ellison's upper class friend, is on the phone. Jimmy's mood immediately darkens when Ellison says that Helena wants to stay with them. Jimmy explodes. He says he wishes that Ellison would have a baby that would die so that they could experience true suffering. The second act begins with Helena and Ellison sharing the womanly duties of the home while Jimmy plays his trumpet off stage. Ellison tells Helena about her first months with Jimmy. They live with his working class friend Hugh Tanner and spend time going on raids to portray parties of Ellison upper class friends. She says that she felt like a hostage from those sections of society they had declared war on. Helena asks why they got married, and Ellison says that it seemed to be largely because Ellison's mother and her father, Colonel Redcliffe, approved that made Jimmy want to marry her no matter what. Jimmy and Cliff come in to eat when he hears, and Helena and Ellison are going to church together that day. Jimmy also becomes convinced that Helena is out to take Ellison away from him. He lets fly a series of outrageous insults against Ellison's mother. Helena tries and fails to reason with him and Jimmy asks whether she has ever watched someone die. He tells the story of watching his father die from wounds received fighting in the Spanish Civil War. When he was 10 years old and claims that this taught him more about life than Helena and Alison know even now. Near the end of the scene, Jamie leaves to go get the telephone. While he is gone, Helena tells Alison that she was sent a message to Colonel Redford, asking him to come pick Alison up. Alison doesn't protest. When Jimmy returns, he says that Hugh's mom, a working class woman who set him up in his candy stall and for whom he harbors deep affection, is dying of a stroke. He asks Alison to come to the hospital with him. Instead, she goes to church. Jimmy is left alone on stage. In the next scene, Colonel Redford helps Ellison pack to leave. He reveals that he and Ellison's mother reacted too strongly to her marriage with Jimmy and that Jimmy might have been right to be angry with them. He says that he says he thinks that Jimmy could be right, that Redford is a relic of an old version of England that has ceased to exist. He also says that he and Ellison have a tendency to stay neutral and not to take a strong stand on things. She is surprised to hear this from him, and as she finishes packing, she briefly reconsiders her move. Then Helena enters, and Alison decides to go. She says goodbye to Cliff. Helena stays behind because she has a work meeting the following day. Alison and Colonel Redcliffe exit, and Cliff, angry that Helena has disrupted their life, leaves before Jimmy comes back. Jimmy returns to a few moments later, furious, having seen Alison leaving with her father on his way home. Helena gives him a letter that Alison wrote explaining her decision. Jimmy is angry at her polite, restrained language. Helena tells him that Ellison is going to have a baby. He says that he is not overcome with emotion at this news and insults Helena, who slaps him. This causes Jimmy to collapse in despair. Then Helena him passionately, and the act ends. The scene opens several months later, looking very similar at the beginning of Act One, except that it is now Helena who is ironing. Jimmy and Cliff joke and discuss newspaper articles. They rough house, and Cliff dirties his shirt. Helena leaves to clean it, and while she is off stage, Cliff tells Jimmy that he is moving out. Jimmy wonders why he always chooses women over male friendship, even though he values Cliff company more highly than he values Helena's. Helena comes back with the shirt, and Cliff leaves to dry it in his room. Helena tells Jimmy that she loves him, and he asks her desperately to never leave him. Then Ellison appears at the door looking sick and disheveled. The next scene opens a few minutes later with Jimmy playing with his trumpet off stage. Ellison tells Helena that she is not angry with her as is and is not trying to break up the new couple. Helena, however, says that Ellison's presence has reminded her that what she is doing is wrong. Ellison has also had a miscarriage, and Helena considers that a judgment on her relationship. She calls Jimmy back and tells him that she is leaving. Jimmy says that he always knew Helena wasn't strong enough for true love, which requires muscles and guts. Helena leaves. Then Helena leaves, and then what happens? That is, Ellison apologizes, and Jimmy says that she should have sent flowers to Hugh's mom, and remembers his first meeting with her when he thought that she had a wonderful relaxation of spirit. Thus, this turned out to be just a complacency. He says. Ellison lets out a cry and tells him that the loss of their child has made her understand the depth of emotion that he wanted her to have all the time. She tells him that she wants to be corrupt and futile, and collapses at his feet. Jimmy can't bear to see her this way and kneels to help her. Then, with a kind of mocking, tender irony, he launches into the bear and squirrel imaginary game. Poor squirrels, he says to Ellison, and she responds, poor bear. Cite the spade, choose citation style. Okay, Hamad.